to my very first video recorded for Philosophy 331 Ethics in the spring of 2020 while we're dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. I'm going to put Eliza down now, but let's start. So the thing I want to start with today, this is the first of the short videos I'm going to be uploading. I wanted to just give a brief reminder of what we did before the 2-week break that we just had. So we had done most of the content in this class, most of the new things that we're going to be reading, and after the break, the plan was to write this long paper, which we're going to walk through. We'll talk about that in our meeting this week, but I wanted to remind us of this content. So far, we have looked at 4 primary sources and then many what we'll call secondary sources that discuss issues related to those primary sources. So we started with Mill, we looked at Kant, Aristotle, and Nell Noddings, who we will be talking more about this week because we have been looking at secondary sources for Noddings and more generally care ethics this week. But I just wanted to remind us, get back in the flow of things, partially just to help bring everything back up into RAM, but also because it will be useful to have these nuggets in mind as we talk more about these general objections that we saw O'Dowd raise to particularist challenges to care ethics, or rather, care ethics' particularist challenges to, principles. So these are principles. Mill literally calls his the greatest happiness principle, written in English as we've talked about, so not even translated. The greatest happiness principle, you might remember, I think probably you can read this, but it should be in your notes. Actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong in proportion as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. So remember in here, and the greatest happiness principle then, remember, tells us, not Mill thinks, what we need to be thinking about all the time when we are considering what to do or acting, but it explains what makes an action that we choose to do right. So we don't have to believe or think about or have in the back of our mind or anything like that the greatest happiness principle in order for an action we perform to be the right action to perform, to be morally good or praiseworthy or whatever, right? But if we just look at all of the actions in the world and we find the ones that promote happiness more than, as much as they can of the available options, then the greatest happiness principle claims those are the morally good actions. And any more things? No. So, Mill, good. Kant, unlike Mill, right, does think that there has to be some connection between your action and the principle that he thinks explains the correctness of your action. So here, we focused on the formula of humanity version of the categorical imperative in this class, but we did talk about the others briefly. But all of the formulations are categorical imperatives, remember, in the sense that they are imperatives, they have the form of a command, right? Act in such a way, remember the wagging finger. And additionally, right, they have the form of an imperative, they're like a command, the sense that they don't require any additional circumstances for the command to apply, right? So there are some commands which you can feel the force of the command as an imperative if you're in a particular circumstance, right? So if you're hungry, eat something, right? And that can feel really like forceful to you when you're hungry, but you can know that's true, and in some sense even like be governed by it in some general sense, but it's not, it's imperative, well, what philosophers are going to call it's imperatival force, but it's like bossiness, right? Doesn't apply unless you're in that, that particular circumstance, like you're hungry, right? Okay. Formula of humanities, formulation of the categorical imperative, right, says act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. And so we talked a lot about what that meant, how to understand what it was to treat someone as a mere means as opposed to a means and also at the same time an end. But again, this principle, it tells us when actions are going to be good, permissible, morally praiseworthy, worthy, right? But it also needs to be, according to Kant, something that you recognize the authority of, and you perform the action because you recognize it as a duty, that is, as a practical and action-oriented necessity, right? You make yourself into the sort of thing that is rule-governed according to the right rules, but because of the action of your will. Remember, so like, we had this example, we have like the rocks, obey the law of gravity just regardless of what they do. What Kant wants is for us to obey the practical law, not in the way that the rock does, just because it's necessary. It's not necessary that we obey the practical law in the same way it's necessary that the rock obeys physical laws, and then the same way it's necessary that we obey physical laws. What is important is that we recognize the necessity and follow the practical law because of that. So it has this additional role as a principle, but it's still a principle. It still tells us, it still explains, and we'll get to this in the next video, it still plays the role of a principle. We get less clear about this when we go to Aristotle. It's less obviously a principle because Aristotle, remember, is very adamant that the political science, the science of people as a body and what's good for us together, is not something that we can demand as much precision from as, for instance, natural sciences, right? And he thinks this is not a flaw, this is not a problem. You just can't demand more necessity from a topic than it, or sorry, more precision from a topic than it allows. And so what we focused on from Aristotle was this aspect that we saw fall out of this more general function argument, which we talked about. And Aristotle thinks that the human good turns out to be the activity of the soul, remember, our actions that come from us, in accordance with virtue. So good things, good actions, are those which are such that a virtuous person would do them. So we talked a lot about this as well. And the thing I want to sort of remind you of here again is that Aristotle thinks that the application of these general rules, which he does think obtain to a specific instance, is a matter of attention and the ability to see in that circumstance what is morally, or rather we might say, relevant to the general demands that you're under. So he thinks, look, you might think, I know that I'm supposed to be courageous, where I understand this to just be, I ought to act, I ought to respond to fear. I ought to have fear in the right way, at the right time, in the right, to the right amount, and respond in the right way. But I don't yet know what that is, right? Being a courageous person is knowing that you ought to do this thing as described, but in a circumstance, being able to see what the right thing, all of those things, right? How much fear, you have the right amount of fear. You see what the right response is. You are motivated to perform the right response. And that is what we are, what the human good is, and also allows us to see what good actions are. They're actions that are the sort of thing that a virtuous person would do, the sort of thing that someone who's responding to reasons in the right way would do. Okay, finally, and this video has gotten longer than I intended, shockingly, finally we looked before the break, as I said, at Nell Noddings, who we looked at the first chapter of her book, Why Care About Caring, and this is the sort of takeaway that I wanted to remind us of going into this week. I'm going to step back a little bit because it's now down. If I take on the other's reality as possibility and begin to feel its reality, I feel also that I must act accordingly. That is, I am impelled to act as on my own behalf, but on behalf of another. So in this, we have her sort of description of what she ends up thinking caring is. Caring is the attitude of, well, the action impelled by the attitude of recognizing the needs of the other, but not just recognizing them in the way that like the torturer could recognize like what the other person needs in order to prevent them from having it or something. But recognize the needs in a way that you feel their reality as your own, and so you're impelled, you have this motivational aspect, you're impelled to do what they need in the same way that you're impelled to do what you need. And this might not lead you to do it, right? You might care for someone and be impelled to act on their behalf, but not be able to. Just in the same way you might know what you need, but be prohibited in one way or another, or blocked in one way or another to do it. But that doesn't mean you don't care about yourself, probably. And anyway, in any case, rather, there are some aspects of this that's going to be important to kind of keep in mind. One, there is this relational aspect, which we have focused on a lot, that Noddings thinks the thing that's central to ethics that other accounts have just completely not recognized, she thinks, is that the central relationship, or the central aspect of ethics that we have to attend to before we get anything is the relations we stand into others. And that this relation is the thing that gives us motivation to do caring and, that is, ethical actions. And attending to this relationship is more important than attending to it in doing ethical theory, and ethical education is more important than attending to general principles or other accounts might think it's like, the having a proof of the moral result, and she thinks this is starting in the wrong place, it's doing the wrong thing. So that is like overview of what we have so far done, and I'm going to now record a few more videos, well, who knows how many, but a few more videos in which we will look at some things that we're going to be talking about this week. Okay, so see you soon, like really soon.